How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, December 6th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to review the Elite matchups and performances that took place yesterday on Sunday, December 5th, and of course, just to take a step back and take a look at where we are in the calendar year. Starting with football, the college football regular season is actually over, as what is left is bowl games now. And taking a look at what's going on in the NFL, we are entering the last third of the NFL season, as of course, yesterday was the 13th Sunday of the 18-week NFL season. And of course, the NBA and college basketball are just getting underway as well. And because we are nearing the end of the calendar year, we are nearing the midway point for the international soccer seasons. Starting first with what's going on at the collegiate level, starting off with the 11th ranked basketball team in the nation. The Arizona Wildcats faced off against the unranked Oregon State Beavers. Arizona was able to beat Oregon State 90-65. They won this game by 25 after they outscored Oregon State by 8 in the first half. They outscored Oregon State by 17 in the second half. The Arizona Wildcats were led in scoring by their starting guard, Benedict Maturin, their starting sophomore out of Montreal. And Benedict Maturin would finish with 29 points and 6 rebounds in 30 minutes. He shot 11 for 18 from the field, 4 for 9 from 3, and 3 for 5 from the foul line. With this win, the 11th ranked Arizona Wildcats are 7-0 to start their collegiate basketball season. This is their first win in the Pac-12. They are 1-0 in the conference. With this loss, the unranked Oregon State Beavers are 1-8. They are now 0-2 in their Pac-12 schedule right now. Taking a look at what's going on at the professional league, starting off with the NFL. Starting in Atlanta, the Atlanta Falcons hosted the Super Bowl champs Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers would end up beating the Falcons 30-17 after they outscored the Falcons 20-17 in the first half, and they would go on to shut Atlanta out 10-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Atlanta Falcons were led by their elite starting quarterback, Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan would complete 30 of his 41 passes as he threw for 297 yards. He also ran for an additional 2 yards. That's 299 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was Cordero Patterson. He had 13 carries for 78 yards on the ground. He also had 3 receptions for 18 yards. He would combine for about 96 total yards of offense. The Falcons' leading receiver was Russell Gage. Gage had 11 receptions for 130 yards. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Foyesade Olakun would finish with 15 tackles on the day. Marlon Davidson would have the team's lone interception, as his interception was a pick 6. On the winning end of this matchup, the defending Super Bowl champs Tampa Bay Buccaneers were led by their goated starting quarterback Tom Brady out of Michigan. He would complete 38 of his 51 passes as he threw for 368 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. The Buccaneers' leading receiver was Chris Godwin. He finished with 15 receptions for 143 yards. Their second leading receiver was their elite wide receiver Mike Evans. He finished with 7 receptions for 99 yards on the day. And their third leading receiver, Rob Gronkowski, would finish with 4 receptions for 58 yards as he would finish with 2 receiving touchdowns on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin White, their elite middle linebacker out of LSU, and Antoine Winfield Jr. would finish with 10 tackles each. Vita Vea would finish with 2 tackles as both of his tackles were sacks. The Buccaneers would combine for 5 on the day. And Ndamukong Suh would finish with 4 tackles as he had 2 sacks as well. And with this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now 9-3 on the season, as all 3 of their losses have come on the road, but not this game. And on the losing end of this matchup, the Atlanta Falcons are now 5-7 on their NFL season. Jumping out to Chicago, the Bears hosted the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals would end up beating the Bears 33-22. The Cardinals outscored the Bears 21-7 in the first half, and then the Bears would outscore the Cardinals 15-12 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Bears were led by their starting quarterback, Andy Dalton. He threw for 229 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. He also had 6 yards on the ground. That's 235 total yards of offense. The Bears' leading rusher was David Montgomery out of Iowa State. He had 21 carries for 90 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 51 yards through the air. He combined for 141 yards of offense. The Bears' leading receiver, Jakeem Grant Sr., had 5 receptions for 62 yards as he had a receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Roquan Smith led the team in tackles as he had 8 of them. And Robert Quinn would finish with 3 tackles as he would add an additional sack as he is shooting his way up the sack leaderboard. And, of course, on the winning end of this matchup, the Arizona Cardinals were led by their elite starting quarterback, Kyler Murray, out of Oklahoma. He would go on to complete 11 of his 15 passes as he threw for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 10 carries for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He would combine for 182 total yards of offense and 4 touchdowns for the Cardinals on the day. The Cardinals' leading rusher, James Conner, had 20 carries for 75 yards. He also had 2 receptions for 36 yards and an additional touchdown. He had 111 total yards of offense with his receiving touchdown. And on the defensive side of the ball, Jordan Hicks would be their leading tackler. He had 12 tackles and a sack. Jalen Thompson would finish with 10 himself. And then Budda Baker would go on to finish with a 77-yard interception return to go along with his 6 tackles as their elite safety would have a pretty good game for himself. Zach Allen, Byron Murphy Jr., and Jalen Thompson would each have an interception themselves as Jalen Thompson's interception came alongside his 10 tackles. Byron Murphy, alongside his interception, had 6 tackles and half of a sack. Zach Allen, in addition to his sack, would go on to finish with 4 tackles as he had a sack as well. Or he had a sack to go along with his interception. With this win, the Arizona Cardinals are now 10-2. They are 7-0 on the road. And with this loss, the Chicago Bears are now 4-8 as they are now 2-4 at home for the time being. Jumping out to Cincinnati, one state away, the Cincinnati Bengals hosted the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers would end up beating the Cincinnati Bengals 41-22. The Chargers would win this game by 11 after they outscored the Bengals 24-13 in the first half. They also outscored the Bengals 17-9 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Bengals were led in scoring by their starting quarterback, former number 1 overall pick, Joe Burrow. Burrow would throw for 300 yards and a touchdown and 2 interceptions. He also had 1 6-yard touchdown carry, which would add up to 306 total yards, 2 total touchdowns, and 2 picks. The Bengals' leading rusher was Joe Mixon. He had 19 carries for 54 yards as he had a touchdown on the ground. The Bengals' leading receiver was T. Higgins out of Clemson. He finished with 9 receptions for 138 yards as he had the team's lone receiving touchdown. Tyler Boyd had 5 receptions for 85 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Mike Hilton, Joe Bachie, and Jermaine Pratt would each finish with 9 tackles each, leading the team. And then Chidobe Awuzie would finish with the team's lone interception. On the winning end of this matchup, the Los Angeles Chargers were led by their elite starting quarterback, Justin Herbert. He would end up completing 26 of his 35 passes as he threw for 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. He also had a 6-yard carry, so that's 323 total yards of offense for Herbert. The Chargers' leading rusher, Austin Eckler, had 14 carries for 59 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 5 receptions for 45 yards through the air. That's 104 total yards of offense for Austin Eckler. The Chargers' leading receiver was Mike Williams. Williams had 5 receptions for 110 yards. Their second leading receiver, Jalen Guyton, had 4 receptions for 90 yards as he had a receiving touchdown as well. Their elite wide receiver, Keenan Allen, had 5 receptions for 34 yards as he had the other 2 receiving touchdowns on the day. Kazir White and Drew Tranquil will lead the team in tackles on the other end as they each had 10 of them, as Drew Tranquil also had a sack for himself. Uchenna Nwosu would finish with 2 tackles as he would finish with 2 sacks as well. The team would combine for 6 sacks. Chris Harris Jr. would go on to finish with an interception to go along with his 4 tackles. The other interception for the Chargers went to Michael Davis. Davis had 2 tackles on the day. With this win, the Los Angeles Chargers are now 7-5. And with this loss, the Cincinnati Bengals are also 7-5 as these teams are fighting for a wild card spot. Jumping out to Detroit, the Lions hosted the Minnesota Vikings, and in this matchup, the Lions would pick up their very first win of the season. They would beat the Vikings 29-27 after they outscored the Vikings 20-6 in the first half. The Vikings would outscore the Lions 21-9 in the second half. They ended up taking the lead with less than 2 minutes left, but it would be the last play of the game from the Lions, an 11-yard touchdown pass from Jared Goff to Amon-Ra St. Brown to win the Lions their very first game of the season, to, of course, give NFL fans a game for the ages. On the losing end of this matchup, the Vikings were led by their starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins, out of Michigan State. He threw for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 6 yards on the ground. He had 346 total yards of offense. The Vikings' leading rusher was Alexander Madison. He had 24 carries for 90 yards as he had a rushing touchdown. He also had 34 yards through the air. That's 124 total yards of offense. The Vikings' leading receiver was their elite wide receiver out of LSU, Justin Jefferson. He finished with 11 receptions for 182 yards and a receiving touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Nick Vigil would lead the team in tackles as he had 15. Blake Lynch would finish with 9 tackles as he had 2 of the team's 3 sacks. Cameron Dantzler would have the team's lone interception as he had 2 tackles. On the winning end of this matchup, the Detroit Lions were led by their starting quarterback, former number 1 overall pick, Jared Goff. He threw for 296 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. He also ran for an additional yard. That's 297 total yards of offense for Jared Goff. The Lions' leading rusher was Jamal Williams. He had 17 carries for 71 yards on the ground. And he also had a 9-yard reception through the air. That's 80 total yards of offense. On the Lions' receiving or in the receiving core, Amon-Ra St. Brown led the team in yards as he had 10 receptions for 86 receiving yards and one of the team's 3 receiving touchdowns, the game-winning touchdown. On the defensive end of the Lions matchup, their leading tackler was Tracy Walker III. Walker had 11 tackles on the day, and then Charles Harris would finish with 2 tackles as both of his tackles were sacks. With this win, the Detroit Lions are now 1-10-1 on the season. And then with this loss, the Minnesota Vikings are now 5-7 at this point. Now taking a look at what is going on in Miami, the Miami Dolphins hosted the New York Giants. The Dolphins would end up beating the Giants 20-9 as the Dolphins outscored the Giants 10-3 in the first half, and then they outscored the Giants 10-6 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Giants were led by Mike Glennon at quarterback. He threw for 187 yards and an interception. Their elite running back, Saquon Barkley, had 11 carries for 55 yards on the ground. He also had 6 receptions for 19 yards through the air. That's 74 total yards of offense for him. On the defensive end of this matchup, the Giants were led in tackles by Tay Crowder. He had 9 on the day. On the winning end of this matchup, the Miami Dolphins were led by their young elite starting quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa out of Alabama. He completed 30 of his 41 passes as he threw for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had a rushing yard. That's 245 total yards of offense. The Dolphins' leading receiver was Jalen Waddle, their first-round pick out of Alabama. He had 9 receptions for 90 yards on the day. And on the defensive side of this matchup, Eric Rowe would lead the team in tackles as he had 7 of them. Jalen Phillips out of Miami would finish with 3 tackles as he had 2 of the team's 3 sacks. And their elite cornerback, Xavier Howard, would go on to finish with an interception alongside 2 tackles. As with this win, the Miami Dolphins are now 6-7. With this loss, the New York Giants are now 4-8 on the season at this very moment. Now taking a look at what's going on in New York to the team that's actually playing there, the New York Jets hosted the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles would end up beating the Jets 33-18. The Eagles outscored the Jets 24-18 in the first half before shutting the Jets out 9-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Jets were led by their former second overall pick, Zach Wilson, or the number 2 overall pick from this most recent draft, Zach Wilson. He would go on to throw for 226 yards as he threw for 2 touchdowns and an interception. The Jets' leading receiver was Elijah Moore. He would go on to finish with 6 receptions for 77 yards as he had a receiving touchdown on the day. He also had a rush for 9 yards, so that's 86 total yards of offense. The Jets' leading rusher, Tevin Coleman, had 11 carries for 58 yards. He also had 3 receptions for 19 yards as he would go on to finish with 77 total yards of offense for the Jets. On the defensive end, they were led in tackles by C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams. They each had 13 tackles. And on the winning end of this matchup, the Philadelphia Eagles were led by their starting quarterback, Gardner Minshew. Minshew would throw for 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 11 yards. He had 253 total yards of offense on the day. The Eagles' leading rusher, Miles Sanders, had 24 carries for 120 yards on the ground. He also had 22 receiving yards through the air. That's 142 total yards of offense for Miles Sanders. Their second leading rusher, Kenneth Gainwell, had 12 carries for 54 yards and a receiving touchdown. He also had 5 receptions for 33 yards. That would combine for 87 total yards of offense alongside his rushing touchdown. The Eagles' leading receiver, Dallas Goedert, had 6 receptions for 105 yards and both of the team's receiving touchdowns. On the defensive end of this matchup, T.J. Edwards had 11 tackles on the day. Josh Sweat out of Florida State would finish with 3 tackles as he had a sack and a half on the day. And the Eagles' lone interception, and the lone interception for either team, went to Marcus Epps as his interception would come alongside his 5 tackles. With this win, the Philadelphia Eagles are now 6-7 on the season. With this loss, the New York Jets are now 3-9. Taking a look now at what's going on in Houston, the Texans hosted the Indianapolis Colts from within the AFC South, and the Colts would end up beating the Texans, shutting them out 31-0. Scoring 14 of their 31 in the first half and 7 in the other 17 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Texans were led by Davis Mills, who would throw for 49 yards on the day. Tyrod Taylor would throw for 45 and run for 15. He combined for 60. On the defensive end of this matchup, the Texans were led in tackles by Kamu Grugier-Hill. He finished with 20 tackles on the day as he also had the team's lone sack. On the winning end of this matchup, the Indianapolis Colts were led by Carson Wentz, the former number 2 overall pick. He would end up throwing for 158 yards and a touchdown. He would also run for 8 yards. That's 166 total yards of offense for Carson Wentz. The Colts' leading rusher was Jonathan Taylor. He had 32 carries for 143 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He would also alongside him, the Colts' leading receiver was Michael Pittman Jr. He had 6 receptions for 77 yards. On the defensive end of this matchup, the Colts were led in tackles by Bobby Okereke as he finished with 6 tackles on the day. Al-Qadim Muhammad would finish with 3 tackles as he finished with 2 of the team's sacks. Kamoko Toure would finish with 2 tackles as both of his tackles were the team's other 2 sacks. And the team's lone interception went to Kenny Moore II as he had 4 tackles to go along with his interception. With this win, the Indianapolis Colts are 7-6, and with this loss, the Houston Texans at this very moment are now 2-10. Jumping out to Las Vegas, the Raiders hosted the Washington football team. Washington would end up beating the Raiders 17-15. This game ended up going to the final quarter. The Washington ended up outscoring Las Vegas 7-3 in the first half. The Raiders outscored the Washington football team 12-3 in the second half. The Raiders ended up taking a 1-point lead after kicking a field goal with about 2 minutes left. Washington would drive it the length of the field, and then they would nail a 48-yard field goal, or it would be Brian Johnson in particular, with 37 minutes left to put Washington back at 500 for the season. On the losing end of this matchup, the Las Vegas Raiders were led by their starting quarterback, Derek Carr. Carr would throw for 249 yards and He would also run for 24 yards on the day. He would combine for 273 total yards of offense. The Las Vegas Raiders elite running back Josh Jacobs was their leading rusher. He had 13 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 38 yards through the air. He would go on to combine for 90 total yards of offense. The Raiders' leading receiver, Hunter Renfrow, had 9 receptions for 102 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Denzel Perryman led the Raiders in tackles. He had 12 of them. Divine Diablo had 11 tackles himself. Nate Hobbs would have the team's lone interception as he had 9 tackles. On the winning end of this matchup, the Washington football team was led by their starting quarterback, Taylor Heineke. Heineke threw for 196 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He also ran for 10 yards. That's 206 total yards of offense for him. The Washington football team's leading rusher, Antonio Gibson, had 23 carries for 88 yards on the ground. He had 23 receiving yards and a touchdown through the air, so that would combine for 111 total yards of offense with his lone interception. And then on the defensive end of on this matchup for Washington, Cole Holcomb was their leading tackler. He had 10 tackles on the day. With this win, the Washington football team is now 6-6, and with this loss, the Las Vegas Raiders are now 6-6 as well in their season. Now taking a look at what went down in Los Angeles, the Rams hosted the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Rams would end up beating the brakes off the Jaguars, winning this matchup 37-7. They outscored the Jaguars 16-7 in the first half before shutting them out 21-0 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Jacksonville Jaguars were led by their young elite starting quarterback, the number 1 overall pick from the 2021 NFL Draft, Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence would complete 16 of his 28 passes as he threw for 145 yards. He also ran for 10 yards, so that's 155 total yards of offense. The Jaguars' leading tackler on the defensive end was Andrew Wingard. He had 8 tackles on the day. And on the winning end of this matchup, the Los Angeles Rams were led by their starting quarterback out of Georgia, Matt Stafford. Stafford threw for 295 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for an additional 2. That's 297 total yards of offense. The Rams' leading rusher was Sony Michel out of Georgia. He had 24 carries for 121 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 3 receptions for 8 yards through the air. That's 129 total yards of offense. The Rams' leading receiver was Cooper Kupp. He had 8 receptions for 129 yards as he had a receiving touchdown. On the defensive end, Ernest Jones had 9 tackles as he had half of a sack. And then with this win, the LA Rams are now 8-4 on the season. And with this loss, the Jacksonville Jaguars are now 2-10 on the season for themselves. Taking a look at what's going on in Pittsburgh in this heated AFC North rivalry clash, the Pittsburgh Steelers would host the Baltimore Ravens, and the Steelers would end up beating the Ravens 20-19. The Ravens outscored the Steelers 7-3 in the first half, and they were up 10-3 going into the fourth quarter. The Steelers would end up taking a touchdown lead over the Ravens thanks to a 5-yard touchdown pass from Ben Roethlisberger to Deontay Johnson with about 2 minutes left. The Ravens would drive the length of the field and score a touchdown as Lamar Jackson threw a touchdown to Sammy Watkins, but the 2-point conversion would fail, and the Steelers would run away with a 1-point victory, winning this one 20-9. That's actually how it ended. With a good defensive stop on the Ravens, because, of course, that's how you win these moments, especially in a play like that. On the losing end of this matchup, the Ravens were led by their elite starting quarterback, Lamar Jackson. The former MVP would complete 23 of his 37 passes as he threw for 253 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He also ran the ball 8 times for 55 yards. He would combine for 308 total yards of offense for Baltimore. Their second leading rusher, Devontae Freeman out of Florida State, had 14 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He had 5 receptions for 45 yards through the air. He had 97 total yards of offense. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Brandon Williams would lead the Ravens in tackles as he had 11 of them on the day. And on the winning end of this matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers were led by their elite starting quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger. He would complete 21 of his 31 passes as he threw for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Steelers' leading rusher, Najee Harris, would have 21 carries for 71 yards on the ground. He had 5 receptions for 36 yards through the air, as he would finish with 107 total yards of offense. The Steelers' leading receiver, Deontay Johnson, had 8 receptions for 105 yards, as he had both of the team's receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, their elite safety, Minkah Fitzpatrick, would finish with 9 tackles, as he led the team in tackles. Their elite defensive end, TJ Watt, would have 6 tackles on the day, as he had 3.5 sacks. Chris Wormley would finish with 5 tackles, as he had 2.5 sacks. And then the Steelers' elite defensive tackle, Cameron Hayward, would finish with 4 tackles, as he had a sack for himself. Don't forget, going back to Minkah Fitzpatrick, who led the team in tackles, he would also have the Steelers' lone interception as well. With this win, the Pittsburgh Steelers are now 6-5-1 on the year, and with this loss, the Baltimore Ravens have slipped to 8-4 on the year. Taking a look now at what's going on in Seattle, the Seahawks hosted the San Francisco 49ers from within the NFC West. The Seahawks would end up beating the Niners 30-23. The Niners outscored the Seahawks 23-21 in the first half. The Seahawks would end up outscoring the Niners, or shutting them out 9-0 in the second half. They would end up sacking Jimmy Garoppolo to tie the game and get a safety, and then the Seahawks would end up taking the lead off of a 12-yard touchdown pass from Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett in the third. On the losing end of this matchup, the San Francisco 49ers were led by Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. Garoppolo threw for 299 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher, Elijah Mitchell, had 22 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown. Then Mitchell also had 18 receiving yards through the air. That would combine for 84 total yards from scrimmage. The Niners were led in receiving by their elite tight end, George Kittle. He had 9 receptions for 181 yards, as he had both of the team's receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, Azeez Al-Shaair would finish with 15 tackles, as he had half of a sack. And then Kawan Williams would have the team's lone interception, as he had 5 tackles alongside that pick. On the winning end of this matchup, the Seattle Seahawks were led by their elite starting quarterback and the reigning Walter Payton Man of the Year, Russell Wilson. Wilson will complete 30 of his 37 passes, as he threw for 231 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He also ran for 15 yards. He had 246 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was Travis Homer. He had 3 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Tyler Lockett. He had 7 receptions for 68 yards, as he had a receiving touchdown for himself. Their second leading receiver, their elite wide receiver, DK Metcalf, had 5 receptions for 60 yards on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Jordan Brooks had 12 tackles on the day, as he led the team. Quandre Diggs and Bobby Wagner, the Seahawks' elite middle linebacker, would each finish with an interception each, as Bobby Wagner would finish with 9 tackles alongside his interception. Quandre Diggs would have 4 tackles alongside his. With this win, the Seattle Seahawks are now 4-8 on the year, and with this loss, the San Francisco 49ers are now 6-6. Last but not least, jumping out to Kansas City, looking out the reigning AFC champs, the Kansas City Chiefs hosted the Denver Broncos. The Chiefs would end up beating the Broncos 22-9 after they outscored Denver 10-3 in the first half. They went on to outscore Denver 12-6 in the second half in order to pick up this very big win at home, as the Chiefs are red hot at this moment of the year. On the losing end of this matchup, the Denver Broncos were led by Teddy Bridgewater, their starting quarterback out of Louisville. He would throw for 257 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. He also ran for 17 yards. That would combine for 274 total yards of offense. The Broncos were led on the ground by Javonte Williams. He had 23 carries for 102 yards. He also had 76 yards through the air and the team's lone touchdown, and it was his receiving touchdown. He would finish with 178 total yards of offense for Denver. The Broncos' leading receiver, Jerry Jeudy, had 4 receptions for 77 yards on the day. Their leading tackler on the defensive end was Kenny Young. He had 9 tackles on the day. Pat Surtain II would have the team's lone interception, as he also had a tackle. On the winning end of this matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs were led by their elite starting quarterback, the $500 million man, Patrick Mahomes, out of Texas Tech. He would complete 15 of his 29 passes as he threw for 184 yards, and he also threw for an interception. He ran for 12 yards as Mahomes' lone touchdown came on the ground. He would go on to combine for 196 total yards of offense. The Chiefs' leading rusher, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, had 14 carries for 54 yards on the ground. He had 28 yards through the air. That's 82 total yards of offense. And then on the defensive end of this matchup, the Chiefs were led in tackles by their elite safety, Tyrann Mathieu. He had 9 tackles on the day. Daniel Sorensen would have a pick 6 for himself, as Daniel Sorensen would have 2 tackles alongside his pick 6. Juan Thornhill would have the team's other interception. And with this win, the Kansas City Chiefs are now 8-4. They are now 5-2 at home. With this loss, the Denver Broncos are now 6-6 on the season. And that was the final game from yesterday, as of course the final game of Week 13 will take place today, as the Buffalo Bills will host the New England Patriots from within their division, the AFC East. And then taking a look at what's going on at the NBA level, starting off in Atlanta, the Atlanta Hawks hosted the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets would end up beating the Hawks 130-127 after the Hornets outscored the Hawks by 7 in the second quarter. That was really the difference in this matchup. On the losing end of this matchup, the Hawks were led in scoring by their starting power forward, John Collins. Collins finished with 31 points and 12 rebounds in 38 minutes. Collins shot 12 for 22 from the field, 2 for 4 from 3, and a perfect 5 for 5 from the free throw line. Their starting shooting guard, Kevin Herter, out of Maryland, finished with 28 points in 34 minutes as he shot 9 for 14 from the field, 7 for 11 from 3, and a perfect 3 for 3 from the foul line. And the Hawks' elite starting point guard, Trae Young, would finish with 25 points, 4 rebounds, 15 assists, and 6 turnovers in 36 minutes. Young shot 9 for 22 from the field, 4 for 10 from 3, and 3 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Charlotte Hornets were led in scoring by their starting small forward, Miles Bridges. He finished with 32 points and 3 steals in 40 minutes as he shot 11 for 15 from the field, 4 for 6 from 3, and a perfect 6 for 6 from the foul line. Their starting shooting guard, Kelly Oubre Jr., finished with 28 points in 39 minutes as he shot 11 for 17 from the field and 6 for 10 from 3. With this win, the Charlotte Hornets are now 14-11 on the season, and with this loss, the Atlanta Hawks are now 12-12. Now taking a look at what's going on in Cleveland, the Cavaliers hosted the Utah Jazz. The Jazz would end up barely beating the Cavaliers 109-108. They won it by 1 after they outscored the Cavs slightly they outscored them in the first 3 quarters. The Cavs outscored the Jazz by 8 in the final quarter, but it just wouldn't be enough. On the losing end of this matchup, the Cavs were led in scoring by their starting point guard, Darius Garland. Garland finished with 31 points, 5 assists, and 4 steals in 35 minutes. He shot 11 for 19 from the field, 5 for 8 from 3, and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Utah Jazz were led in scoring by their elite starting shooting guard, Donovan Mitchell. Mitchell finished with 35 points and 6 assists alongside 7 turnovers in 39 minutes. He shot 12 for 21 from the field, 4 for 8 from 3, and 7 for 8 from the foul line. And then their elite starting center, Rudy Gobert, would finish with 6 points, 20 rebounds, 3 assists, and 5 blocks in 38 minutes as he shot 3 for 6 from the field. With this win, the Utah Jazz are now 16-7. With this loss, the Cleveland Cavaliers are now 13-11. Taking a look at what's going on north of the border in Toronto, the Raptors hosted the Washington Wizards. The Toronto Raptors would end up beating the Wizards 102-90. They won this game by 12 after they outscored the Wizards by 21 in the first half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Wizards were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard out of Georgia, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Pope finished with 26 points in 28 minutes. He shot 8 for 9 from the field, a perfect 4 for 4 from 3, and a perfect 6 for 6 from the foul line. And their elite starting shooting guard out of Florida, Bradley Beal, would finish with 14 points and 7 assists in 35 minutes. Beal shot 4 for 12 from the field, 1 for 3 from 3, and 5 for 7 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Toronto Raptors were led in scoring by their elite starting power forward, Pascal Siakam. Siakam finished with 31 points and 6 rebounds and also 3 assists in 36 minutes. As Siakam shot 10 for 21 from the field, he made his only 3-point attempt on the day, and he shot 10 for 12 from the foul line. With this win, the Toronto Raptors are now 11-13. With this loss, the Washington Wizards are now 14-10. Last but not least, jumping out to Houston, the Rockets hosted the New Orleans Pelicans. The Rockets would end up beating the Pelicans 118-108. They won this game by 10 after they outscored the Pelicans by 8 in the first half. On the losing end of this matchup, the New Orleans Pelicans were led in scoring by their elite starting small forward out of Duke, Brandon Ingram. Ingram finished with 40 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists in 38 minutes. Ingram shot 15 for 28 from the field, 3 for 10 from 3, and 7 for 8 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Houston Rockets were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Eric Gordon, and their starting center, Christian Wood. Gordon finished with 25 points and 5 assists in 33 minutes. He shot 7 for 14 from the field, 3 for 7 from 3, and a perfect 6 for 6 from the foul line. Christian Wood finished with 23 points and 8 rebounds, as well as 2 blocks in 33 minutes. He shot 7 for 13 from the field and 5 for 6 from 3. With this win, the Houston Rockets are now 7-16 on the season, and with this loss, the New Orleans Pelicans are now 7-19. That is what the NBA is looking like following yesterday's matchups, and of course, last but not least, taking a look at what's going on internationally. Starting off in the Premier League in England, Manchester United hosted Crystal Palace and was able to pull up a 1-0 win following their lone 77th minute goal from their Brazilian midfielder Fred. Tottenham hosted Norwich City, and they were able to pull off a 3-0 win as their third goal came from their elite Korean forward, Sung Heung-min. At the same time, jumping to the Italian Serie A, Juventus hosted Genoa, and they will pull off a 2-0 win as their second goal came from their elite Argentinian forward, Paulo Dybala. And that is really everything that I've got for you, but that's everything that's going on from yesterday's matchups from Sunday, December 5th. And once all of today's matchups are done, I will come back tomorrow on Tuesday, December 7th for another episode of The Elite. And until then, I want to thank everyone once again for listening. I do hope all is well. And I will catch you with another episode tomorrow. I do want to thank the ESPN, NCAA, NFL, NBA, and FIFA websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I need, because without them, I wouldn't be able to do so. And I want to thank everyone once again for listening. I do hope all is well. And I want to thank everyone for sticking around as we navigate through the world of sports one day at a time. Thanks for listening. I hope all is well. And I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Peace out.